getting for Minnesota, you being a Minnesota native, for being the first draft pick. I think that's great. Season's not starting until January though. But I wanted to talk to a fellow coach about her hockey career because growing up, I didn't really know about girls hockey. Of course, you're a young boy. You're not really. I didn't see a lot of girls carrying a bag around and a couple sticks, so I just didn't really know how it went. But I have seen as a coach over the years see the growth that's happening, and I really wanted to chat with Alana about that because she's a great advocate for this since she also coaches all levels and all genders and has pretty amazing perspective on the game and its need to grow. So we're going to switch this over to Alana Blahoski. We've got a fellow coach of mine from the state of hockey, not hockey town like myself, but that's okay. She's a Providence Friar. Providence has their rink. It just turned 50. They announced this week. Before playing 6 years, she did that before playing 6 years with the U.S. national team, which of course in 1998 was our first women's competition in the Olympic Games. And of course, the beauty of the USA, they won the first gold medal in '98 in Nagano. Since then, she's been coaching not only at the U.S. level, um, private lessons in the Northeast, all over the country. Um, I'm definitely going to say this wrong. I think it's Djurgårdens in Sweden. I
Close.
totally
Yeah.
screwed it up? Yeah.
Close.
Um, and then currently you're coaching, kind of helping out around here in New York, making my kids better, even though I have to be hard at them on them about showing up when we have you on the list to help out. But welcome, Coach Alana Blahoski.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here, and thank you for that introduction.
You got it.
Reminding me of how old I am. Always going back.
Well, I think I'm a little older, which is good. So I've got that. You've got that. I've got that on you. So
No, Steve,
um,
I've got you. I've got you. I was born in '74. What about you?
oh yeah, 78. Okay.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter. We're only living in New York, as you know. We're only as old as we act. So, um,
Exactly.
one thing I'd like to kind of ask first off of from everybody is what is a real fond memory of hockey? It could be an old one. It could be a current one. Could involve family, friends, teammates, whichever. We'll start there.
Yeah, I have a few. I would say from childhood, it would be Christmas Day. There was a tradition of going to skate with my father and my two brothers, and we would play 2-on-2, and it would be my father and I against my two brothers, and we would just play outdoors all day on Christmas Day, and usually we would win. And then we would, head home and have like Christmas dinner. Um, and that was a really special, beautiful time to be able to play with my dad and also, play against my brothers. And they were always so encouraging. I have to say, they were never like, "Oh, you're a girl," and blah blah blah. Because I grew up in a time where girls weren't really encouraged to play hockey, even in the great state of Minnesota and the state of hockey. We were told we were encouraged to play ringette. So yeah, I specifically remember going into rinks as a kid and signing like petitions saying I don't want to play ringette. I just want to play hockey. Why can't girls just play hockey, right? Um, and then a most recent fond memory I will say is we just had our 25th Olympic team reunion, and we had that in Rhode Island, in Newport, Rhode Island, near Sarah DaCosta Hayes's house. And I believe there were 18 out of 20 of us that were able to make it. And it was, I mean, a blast to see everyone again and a blast to get to party with the girls, because we were training and then we won and it was all kind of a whirlwind and we never really, I think, got a chance to let loose for, more than a few days. And that was great. And it's great to see that everybody's doing well. And feeling good and healthy.
Yeah, no, that's pretty great because it actually both those things kind of lead into things that that I kind of want to discuss. And the first one is, I mean, the Christmas memory is totally lovely. I had definitely going down to the pond around Christmas as well. My dad is a bit of a bender, so I don't know if we'd win. So, but but yeah, that kind of I'm curious about what you were mentioning as far as like girls were encouraged to play ringette instead of hockey, and how was that in St. Paul playing hockey? Was there a lot of girls like teams, or were you playing on boys teams until like high school or something? How was that in Minnesota?
Yeah, in Minnesota at the time. And so I'll say I started when I was 6. So it was about 1979 I started. And the way I started, my father was coaching my older brother and babysitting me at the same time. So he was on the ice and I was running around the rink, like jumping off the bleachers and doing all sorts of things. And my mom was working the overnight shift at the hospital. And so my father was like, "Oh man, I got to figure this out." So he just put me in hockey gear and threw me on the ice. And I was just skating. Well, I don't know if I was skating. In my mind, I was skating, but I'm sure I was just falling all over. And afterwards, I looked at him and I said, I love this. Like, it's great." Um, I grew up playing with boys. There were no girls' teams. In fact, we started the first girls' team in Minnesota, and it was called the Minnesota Thoroughbreds. And the coach of the Minnesota men's team, the Minnesota Gophers, there was a gentleman named Woog. Doug Woog was his name. And his brother, Jim Woog, had a daughter, and she played hockey. And so it was a collection of girls. I mean, we had girls that would drive an hour and a half up to 2 hours to come to practice because it was girls coming from all over the state, not just the metro area, just not the Twin Cities. And it was Joy Woog who actually named the team because we were like, okay, what should we call ourselves? And she's like, well, let's call ourselves the Thoroughbreds, you know? And we were feeling, I mean, we thought we had the best team on the planet because we were like, wow, these girls are so good. And then we went out to the East Coast. We went to Worcester, Mass for nationals. And I mean, absolutely got spanked by the likes of Assabet Valley, like these programs that have had, you know, have had a girls program for many, many years. But I'm proud to say, like, we started a girls program and we didn't have competition. So we competed against women that played in like a senior women's league. So basically, you know, that's kind of who we were able to compete against. So of course we go out to nationals and we get spanked, but it was again a great experience.
Probably a bit of an age variation there, I would imagine,
Oh
when you're
yeah,
competing.
that as well. But you know, the fact that we were able to compete at nationals on the East Coast, most of us, there were a majority of us that were recruited that got to be seen by some college coaches. So that was, you know, in hindsight, that was really beneficial. Whereas that would not have happened staying in Minnesota because at that time there were not only there were no girls youth teams, there were no college teams, no high school teams. So that happened. I want to say after I graduated college in '96, although maybe University of Minnesota, I can't remember when they first had a program, but you see, I mean, it's absolutely taken off in Minnesota. They have a Miss Hockey to go alongside the Mr. Hockey in the high school, and the girls' high school tournament is pandemonium, like the boys' tournament. And college, they regularly see, you know, great crowds come and watch the college game. It's really, really taken off.
Yeah, and on top of it, I mean, I'm trying to figure out too. I know that when you went, since you went to Providence, was there a lot of like women's hockey and like women's college hockey, or was it like a kind of like normal Northeast, which is kind of been the U.S. U.S. Has always been kind of the Northeast or the Midwest, the northern Midwest,
Yeah.
and I don't know if like Wisconsin was around. Also, kind of surprising that you went all the way to Providence instead of somewhere in Minnesota.
Yeah, there was nothing. There was nothing in the Midwest. There was only the ECAC, and that was on the East Coast. And we actually competed against the Ivy League schools. We were all clumped into one, and then Colby at the time was Division 1. We played against Colby. Um, it was, Northeastern New Hampshire, Providence. They were the sort of big guns. And then we would play Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Princeton. I'm sure I'm missing. Colby was in the league as well. I might be missing a few schools there. But then it really like took off. Then it really became a national sport, the women's college hockey.
Well, and you were like right at the right time because the '90s was always a big kind of a big jump in hockey in all aspects, where
Yeah,
players were coming from Europe in the NHL. There were so many leagues all over the country to watch minor league hockey. College hockey was kind of growing like crazy in the '90s, and then
yeah.
you got kind of put right into the right time there, where you
Oh,
got to play
absolutely.
college and
Yeah.
go to Nagano. Um, I noticed you have 80. I found the stats, which this is one thing that I found very interesting about now knowing that there hasn't wasn't a ton of women's hockey back then. Um, it's like hard to find your stats, but I
Yeah.
can find a guy that played like backdoor beer league, minor league
Hmm.
somewhere, 25 years ago. I can find everything I
Yeah.
need to know about him, but it's
Yeah.
really hard to find really you know the old guard of women's hockey. And I finally found something that was on, I think it was on the Olympics website, that said you had 83 points in 121 games at Providence. And
Yeah.
my curiosity with that is I see you skate. You're such a great skater, and I see you skate often at the rink that we both coach at. But I'm always curious to understand what your playing style was in college, and then also leading into the national program.
Well, in college as well, I had to. I mean, that's another memory I have. My senior year, I played an awful lot of defense, which I don't particularly care for. I'm definitely a forward. I love to forecheck. It's hard to stand on that blue line. And back in the day, I mean, it wasn't a defense, pass to rush and join the offensive play. So you kind of had to be more stay at home. Um, I was very much, I'll say on the national team, very much penalty killer, not much power play time. Again, forechecked like crazy. Had great line mates. I was with Baker and Katie King for most of the time, and we would get that shift. Like if we were just scored on, we would get that shift to get out there and get things going. I love that. Creating chaos, like just jumping, taking away time and space from opponents with the puck was one of my most favorite things. And I loved penalty killing. Loved penalty killing when you get a shot off, block a shot on the shin pads, and then you take off on a breakaway. Yeah, so definitely a grinder, definitely a hard worker. I would say I didn't have much of a touch. I kind of wish I'm envious of players nowadays and the focus that's given to skill development because there was not much of that back in the day. I mean,
Yeah,
first of all, not easy to find anything. There was a book called Overspeed Training by Jack Blatherwick, and he worked with the University of Minnesota. Great, fantastic book, but it was a lot about overspeed skating and not much about stick handling. And I mean, it's been said to me a few times, if your hands were as fast as your feet, you'd be, putting the puck in the net a lot more. Um, but yeah, for me, skating has always been. I love that part of the game. I
yeah.
love the speed. I love the sound. Everything about it.
Well, and it's so interesting to see. I mean, in the the 30 something 30 plus years that I've been skating to see how it's progressed over so many years, and the
Oh
training
yeah,
of it now is so crazy. I mean, speaking of what you were talking about as far as like stick handling, I think when I was in the 90s, all that was around was Darren Turcott, like stick
yeah,
handling schools. And that was like the only one. And
yeah,
it was always for the guys that kind of seemed like they were a bit cocky, and they all they wanted
yeah,
to do was score, and they didn't know how to play both sides of the puck.
yeah, yeah.
So
I yeah, I think there's been so much information out there, and so much progression in terms of the development and what it takes to really to combine all those skills and really work on all those skills. We didn't, and I think back to the coaches that I had, and I didn't learn much from my coaches. I got to be honest. Like it was different, and especially on the national team, it was almost like they expected us to know, and it was just like, okay, we're going to run this system, but there wasn't much coaching, especially at like an individual skill development level. There was nothing. It was, we would do circles at the start of practice, get into some one-on-ones, get into odd player rushes, and then, work on systems. And that was about it. There was no time for individual development.
that's interesting. I mean, I kind of did a little research on the '98 team because it's been a little while since I had my eyes on that time. But I
Yeah.
saw this great video about the first game you guys played against Canada in the tournament, and
Yeah.
I think Canada beat you guys 3-1.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a timeout, and your coach said something about bag of donuts or something just to kind of fire you guys up.
Yeah.
And then leading to the next game, the gold I think you guys won it was 3-1 or 3-2, right?
I think it was 3-1. I think it was an empty netter at the end of the game. So I think the gold we won 3-1. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting to hearing about that, but hearing what you were just kind of mentioning as far as your skate, how you're kind of a grinder and a skater, kind of makes me feel like we're moving into the right spots here as far as how does that transition from playing to coaching really work? Because I know that right out of playing for the U.S. team, you did a little assistant coaching there at first, right?
Yeah, and it was actually one camp that I went to. So I made the 98 team. I would say something that was a big life experience after winning was I lost my father about less than a year later. So we won February 1998. Fortunately, he was there because he was a big part of the reason I played. Really, my mom didn't want me to play. She's Eastern European and thought I should be a dancer. Definitely not a hockey player. But my father was just so supportive, and he said, "You can do whatever you want to do. So do whatever you want to do." But so tragically, he passed away December of 1998. So almost a year after, he had a heart attack. He was 51. So
Wow.
yeah, it was really unexpected. I remember he had driven me to the airport. We had a training camp in Boston. This was prior to a Four Nations tournament in Finland. And, he was complaining of like arm pain, and he had gone to the hospital, stayed overnight. They ran extensive tests on him, and they said, oh, it's probably panic attacks, which I thought was a little random. Um, and I remember I got up to go to practice like 2 days later after he had dropped me off. And, it was old school before smartphones. So you had all these, you had a phone and it didn't really show much except all these missed calls and messages. And so I listened and I couldn't believe it. He had passed away during the night. And I remember I was in such shock. I went to practice and I told Cami and I told Karin Bai, and I said, you know what, I just need to practice, and then I'll figure out after, like, going home and everything else.
Yeah.
So that happened. And that was hard to get over. I mean, along with having an Eastern European mom, we didn't talk much about feelings. So, and everything just kind of went into training. And I think I put too much into training, maybe burnt out a little. I'm not sure. But in any event, I was cut from the 2002 team by the same coach, same coaching staff. And that was the Salt Lake City team. So I ended up working in Salt Lake City for NBC, um, which was
I think
fun.
I remember seeing that.
It was fun, but it was a little challenging. But I said, wow, I'm supposed to be there. So in whatever way, I'll go. And and then and then I went to go play in Europe. So I went to go play in Lugano, Switzerland, and which was fantastic. When you're training for something like the Olympics, your focus is so narrow. You really are so self-centered out of necessity. You say no to hanging out with people because you need your sleep, and your world becomes really small. And then after living in Europe, I was like, wow, there's a great big world out there. So I get invited to national camp, and I was very forthright with same coach, Coach Smith. So the one that took me in '98, cut me in 2002, invites me to camp. This is a 2003, and I said, hey, I don't know if I'm 100% committed anymore, but I'll come to camp and then we'll see. I mean, literally, Steve, I showed up to camp without a hockey stick. I did text the equipment manager. I'm like, Webby, hey, I don't have a stick. Like, can you find me a righty stick? Who does that? You know what I mean? And it's not because I was like cocky or whatever. It's just, it didn't matter so much to me anymore,
Yeah,
which I had the best camp I probably have ever had because it mattered less in a way because it took the pressure off myself. And at the end of camp, Coach Smith said, hey, you made the team. You know, do you want to go to Sweden and play in the Four Nations? And I looked at him and I said, no, I don't. I think it's time for me to step aside. I think it's time for me to make room for someone who, is 100% committed. And right there, he said, well, would you want to come as a coach? And I was like, oh, like, okay, like, I'll do that. So literally, same camp, I went from player to coach, and then I coached the next 3 years. So it was a quick transition. I just remember like being in Sweden before a game, being so nervous, but when you're a coach, there's not much you can do. You know that. You coach.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
essentially you open doors when games are happening, there's not much you can do.
It's interesting though how you went from this gold medal winner, didn't make the team, had a great camp, had a bit of a tough time after the like just kind of thinking this progression. And then
Yeah,
I was actually usually when you talk to someone that said, "Oh, how was the transition from playing to coaching?" and they're like, "Oh, I always thought that I would be a coach or be in the front office or something like that."
yeah,
And it sounds
yeah,
like it was just kind of handed to you that they wanted to keep you around. They probably liked that your you as a person on the team. So it kind of sat in your lap in the right way.
yeah. It totally did. It's funny. I say a lot. Oh, I'm so lucky, right? And my partner's like, oh, you really shouldn't say that. It's fortunate. But there was always that quote like, opportunity is where luck meets preparation, or wait, luck is where opportunity meets preparation. I think that's what it is. But so I mean, I was always prepared. And I guess that has enabled me to say yes to different opportunities and to be given like different opportunities. I mean, really. Um, and, part of, I was really hurt when I got cut. I mean, it was the first trip was going to China. After the team was going to go to China, and my mother, my brother, my sister-in-law all had tickets to go to China to watch us. And I remember, back in the day, I don't know if they still do it that way, but they read your name, um, and it's alphabetical. And if they read your name, you're free to leave. And if they don't read your name, you didn't make the team, so you can stick around and ask why, right? So, um, and after 6 years, I knew where my name fell. Like I knew, and I didn't hear my name, and I just kind of sat there, um, and I remember I went to talk to Coach Smith after, and I said, "Wait, I didn't hear my name," and he's like, "Yeah, you're just not good enough." Like that's what he told me, and
Wow.
that was really, really hard to swallow. But I mean, what am I going to do? Be bitter about that? I mean, it hurt. It was difficult. But again, it wasn't like I had a great opportunity with USA Hockey. And, I'm not going to forget that because then I had, a difficult or a challenging time with USA Hockey. So I think in me being able to let go of that, of the hurt of being cut and not to blame anyone other than myself for where I was at, that allowed me to A, accept the invitation to go to camp, and then B, accept the invitation to work alongside of Coach, who, I played for him and then he cut me and then I coach with him. So it's all very interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting relationship for sure.
Yeah.
Especially when I mean, I imagine when Salt Lake was happening, playing in your home country is, you
Mm.
know, you're like, wow, that would be such a big thing,
Yeah.
and but it sounds like you said, and I mean, fortunate and luck, kind of both ways a bit, but at least you were still able to like kind of stick around, I guess,
Yeah.
and they didn't kind of close the door on you and then not let you back in, which was it's good. At least you still had that going for you. And then
Yeah.
after the U.S. team, I know that you were kind of coaching, doing some private coaching. There were some other teams in there, but was it 3 years? I think you were in Sweden coaching.
Two years in Sweden. But after after Torino, so after the Olympics in '06, we didn't fare too well. It's funny. I heard a great quote from one of my brothers over the 4th of July. He said, "Silver is, first loser, like basically, right?" And that's how you look at it in America. And we took bronze actually in Torino. We lost to Sweden in a shootout. They had a couple of star players that played in college here in the U.S. So they had a goaltender who was fantastic and a couple of really top like goal scorers. And I mean, despite the fact like, we outshot them 52 to I don't know 16 maybe, right? Which is the thing that like I get so irked about with soccer, with professional soccer, is that you can first of all there needs to be more shots on net in my opinion with professional soccer, but that you can go 90 plus minutes, 120 minutes scoreless. You can have one team completely dominate and then go into a shootout and anything can happen, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
it's definitely the percentages are for the shooter, not the goalie.
oh, totally. I mean, I played soccer as well, and I was always like, it's so easy to score. It's like a little person in a giant net. And then you get to hockey, and it's like a giant person in a tiny net. It was
Right, right.
like the flip side. But we went into a shootout against Sweden, um, having outshot them pretty tremendously. One of our top players got a redo. So one of our top players missed, but she got a redo because the goalie did something. So and then she missed again. I mean, it was just there's no other way to put it. It was Sweden's time to beat us. They had never beaten us. It was really it was a terrible time for us because immediately, we kind of look ahead to playing Canada in the gold medal game, which you never should. You never should. You can't take your opponents lightly, any
Right.
opponent. Um, but we never got a chance to play them. And then we ended up beating Finland for bronze, and everybody was just really bummed out
Well,
about
and
that.
predominantly, you guys have been. It's always been the USA Canada when it comes
Hmm.
to women's international hockey, and it's been pretty consistent. And I mean, I think one thing that's pretty great about winning in Nagano was not only is that was like the first year, but also not only the American men's team, but the Canadian men's team were terrible in that
Yeah.
Olympics.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we're talking like Eric Lindros, Wayne Gretzky. The U.S. team had Darian Hatcher, like all these like really big, and Chris Chelios, all these big guys and big names. And
Yeah.
the Czechs won in '98. So it's always been interesting, and it's also been interesting as far as kind of talking about the growth of women's hockey and seeing. I was just watching I think it's the the division just down from the main division that U.S. is in and Canada's in, and I saw that China just won that. I think this
Yeah.
week,
Yeah.
and just seeing how they're playing and how and what they're doing and the skill of every team is kind of pretty amazing
Yeah.
just to see
And
the growth of it.
I think historically, and even to this day, there is no better place to be a female athlete than North America, really. And they say, oh, Scandinavia is really leading the way in terms of like gender equity and equality. And based on my experience there, I'll say they're a solid decade behind the US. And I can couple Canada with that as well, because I feel Canada, Canada hockey, USA hockey, they mirror each other, so these girls are making minimum 80,000 a year if you're in the player pool now, right? So you're professional, you can make a living playing hockey. In At Gordon in Stockholm, which is it's the SDOL, the SDHL, which is the Women's Professional League. Basically, import players get paid, and um, and all the Swedish players, some might get a small stipend each month, but majority of these women, if they're not living at home, they have full-time jobs, um,
Wow.
and they have to take off. In Sweden, there was just this big sort of protest, but you know, they don't get paid to go to camps and to participate in the world championships. They actually have to take time off of work. So not only are they not getting paid by the federation to compete, right? They're not getting a monthly stipend. They also aren't getting paid from their actual job that they need to eat and everything else. So the disparity is pretty huge in that regard. And after, I mean, they still say it. It's the greatest moment in Swedish women's hockey was when they beat the U.S. in Torino and won a silver. Well, if they had kept up the momentum and kept up the support, Sweden would still be right where USA and Canada are. Finland is a pretty great team as well. Small country. They've always been really good, highly skilled. But Sweden, they kind of, I don't know, stopped the funding really. Um, and then you saw for a time being the Swedish national team, they were out of the A pool for a while. They just had to work their way back up to the A pool. That's kind of how bad it got. And you think of men's hockey in Sweden, they're incredible. Some of the top NHL players, especially defenders, are Swedish. And my experience there, so I coached the women's team, and then I worked in the hockey gymnasium, which is J20, J18 teams. And they, I mean, just have everything. They have, skill training. They have basically like a sports psychologist. They have this whole individual like performance plan, right? Where they sit and because once they make it, they sign an NHL contract. There's money that goes back to the mother club. So there's a huge investment in these players. Um, and I feel it's not the same investment, obviously, in the women's program because there's really no place to play. They're not signing, or in the past, they weren't signing these contracts where money would go to the mother club.
That's really that's very interesting because you would think when you hear about Sweden and you hear about all these players that come from there that end up in the NHL, that end up in the NCAA, that end up in minor leagues, and you're like, wow, there's Sweden just must be teeming with just they must just like flowing with money and just giving it to everybody. But it sounds like that the women's game, especially what you just mentioned about the fact that they'll pay players to come from other countries, but they really won't pay players that are actually Swedish and
Yeah,
they have to have other jobs is kind of baffling to me.
yeah,
Um, and it's really sad actually because you know don't get me wrong, I know that I understand the things that the U.S. women's all women U.S. athletes, especially at the international level, and how they've recently you know really found some equality and some kind of so the men are just and the women are both getting paid to when they win and when they compete. Um, but it's just it's so wild to me because I always think that you see in my mind I think USA is like so far behind on that, but
yeah.
you're telling me that they're probably more ahead than most places, which
I
is
really,
a little upsetting.
they really are. Absolutely, I think they are. And it was interesting because I looked up some stuff about because I was really into the World Cup um, soccer tournament this year, and I'm not. I played a little high school soccer, but I wouldn't call myself like a soccer fan. Like I don't. I watch the World Cup when it happens, men, women. But I find the women's game more interesting. I feel like they go so hard at each other. And there, you don't see the laying around so much like you do with the guys, like the rolling around, like trying to get the
They
yellow
have
card or
they're
whatever.
stronger to me in my mind. It's a stronger game. You don't see them
I mean,
like they kind of
there's like,
get up
yeah,
and keep going. It's unreal.
there's like a level of I don't know that I would call it aggression per se, but it's just like they go so hard. They just go so hard. And maybe it's appreciation that they have this opportunity. I mean, they were playing on average in front of 30,000 people every game, which think about it. And it's like globally televised. I mean, I've never had that. I think that's absolutely incredible. Like to be
Yeah,
able to do that. But then you think about like, okay, these were the stats. There were 66% of players that had to take time off from work to go play in this tournament, right? Um, and
it's
then there were
wild.
29% of players reported that they didn't receive any money from their federation, even though their federation received all sorts of money for qualifying. Like each player should have received it's something like $30,000, I think, right? So 29% reported not getting any money from their federation. Yeah.
That's that's aggressive, especially because you know that if you think about if you're not a pro athlete or if you're not playing internationally, and you think about I just want to go on a trip, I don't know, to Paris or something. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
the cost of the flight, the cost of this, the cost of that, and you're like, wow, even the 30,000, you could remove a lot of that pretty fast just getting there and figuring out if you have need a place to stay or whatever they're doing. It's a little it's it's so interesting to hear that just because of the fact that I know that there's pro leagues now happening in hockey. The PWHL just announced this week there's six
Yeah.
locations, even though we don't know any of the names and things like that. But um, I, part of me feels like because I've heard some kind of Twitter things and things like that where like, oh, why don't they just wait until they have their names? And I'm like, it's a pretty big deal to have that talked about. So I'm just happy that it's gonna happen, hopefully. But
Yeah. It is a big deal. And of course, I shouldn't have done this, but I saw yesterday the Post, New York Post, which is not, maybe you don't get the most intelligent comments for certain
It's the
articles when
Wild
you
West, but that's a good thing sometimes.
it totally is. But they had the article that like, okay, women's pro hockey, they just announced like the cities that are going to have the teams. And so I read the article. It was a great article. And then I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have done it. But then I went and I clicked some of the comments, and just so much like aggressive, toxic, like hate. And it's like, I'm sorry, if you love the game of hockey, right? If you love the game of hockey, don't you want to see it available to everyone? You don't have to go to a game, but I'm going to tell you right now, like, viewership for hockey so down, right? The Stanley Cup Finals this past year, it was
Yep.
down 2 million viewers from the year before. That's 43%. Less than 3 million people tuned in to watch game 5 of the
Yeah.
Stanley Cup Finals. Okay? The women, the USA Soccer, they had something ridiculous. I think it was like 3.5 million people tuned in to watch every single game they played, even though it was like 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning sometimes. They had average 3.5 million tune in to watch in a completely different time zone. And we get like 2.7 million to watch Stanley Cup finals. So um, it's a game that needs to grow. And the only way to grow it is to make it available to everyone. Um, a family of four, how are you going to go watch the Rangers play? How are you going to take your family of four to watch the Rangers?
Yeah. Probably
Maybe,
five or
yeah,
six hundred dollars.
maybe you can take your family and especially your daughters to go watch the pro team that is gonna, maybe play out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can afford, so then the game gets more exposure. And the more exposure the game has, the more people are gonna tune in, the more people might play. That's how you grow the game. You don't grow it by, trying to keep it all to yourself. I don't understand that thinking.
It's also got a lot of, and at all levels, it just has too much elitist thinking behind it,
Yeah,
because, you know, when I was a kid, yeah, we couldn't afford Red Wings games growing up in Detroit. Also,
yeah.
you know, it was a time when, living in the suburbs outside of Detroit, you didn't really go to Detroit because you're like, oh, it's still dangerous down there. But
Hmm.
I went to so much minor league hockey especially in my high school years, and that was the things that that hooked me. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. The Red Wings were great in the '90s, and they ended up winning 2 cups and
Ugh,
everything.
Steve Eiserman. Oh,
Yeah, but
amazing.
but being able to see the Flint Generals and all these like wild minor league teams, and
Yeah.
it's starting to come back, but you know, I think in the early 2000s there was 4 leagues that they completely um, went bankrupt, and one of them was the
Really?
largest. Yeah, the CHL in the Colonial League in Texas had the most pro. Texas at one time had the most pro hockey teams in
Wow.
all of North America, and in one location, and they basically folded that team or that league, and only four. I think they only have 4 teams there in Texas now. So
Wow.
and at a time back in when I was living in Texas in '03, you could go see, you go to Austin, you go to Odessa, you could go to any part of the state and see hockey. And
Yeah.
this women's league, I'm so happy that it's going to be kind of, they call it the original six, even though
Yeah.
one of the 6 teams is in Minnesota, which I think it's definitely necessary. But
Yeah.
there needs to be more encouragement to kind of not only go to those, but go to a women's college hockey game. Syracuse
Oh,
has a really
yeah.
good team. I wish NYU had one so that us living in New York City could see a women's hockey team. But yeah, it's interesting to see the growth of it, and especially that's why I'm happy I got to discuss this with you, just because when I was a kid, all my friends were guy hockey players. I
Yeah.
never ran into a female that was a hockey player.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple football players, maybe a couple baseball players here and there. But to see the growth of it now, myself getting to coach young girls and seeing their excitement of the game, and also seeing how some of them can be more, you know, that's why I always tell people never underestimate watching women's hockey because there
Yeah.
might not be full hitting, there might not be fighting, but doesn't mean it's not an aggressive game to watch.
Oh, right. Yeah. And that's the other thing. I am really excited for the new league because first time you're going to have like the best players in the world um, competing against each other. And I know you can say, well, we have the Olympics, right? But this is not diluted in any way. They have a player pool of 300 players, I believe, from all around the world, and the best of the best that they're putting in, and it's going to be a great product. Like I know that, and I just hope people can, keep an open mind about it and go see. And maybe the comparison, it's not men's hockey, and so we don't need to compare it to men's hockey. It's something in and of itself. I mean, it's hockey, right? And it's a different take on hockey, and it might be something that changes people's minds in terms of women without the checking. There's always been more flow to the game, so there's been such an emphasis on like passing and holding on to the puck, right? Because you don't have to worry about getting nailed. So it is a different game in terms of flow. There's not all this stop and start that you get with all the hitting, and it's a fast game. It's an aggressive game along the wall. Like when you watch Canada US play, you can't tell there's no hitting. Like
Right.
to the
Yeah.
naked eye, you can't
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah.
Um, and I think too, hopefully we'll see more women like in the stands watching, because when you look in a rink like Madison Square Garden, I mean, it's a lot of guys. It's a lot of guys, and male, professional sports. It's a lot of men watching men, which is great. But we need to get more women to just appreciate, the beauty of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and also some how women are treated in the situation. So when there's a bunch of men in the like when you go to a Rangers game and there's all
oh yeah,
men there, and of course Margot Robbie's there or something. So
yeah.
like all the guys, of course, worry about that, but it's like they don't think about the fact that she's a hockey fan. She's just there being a fan. She doesn't really
She
care that you're
plays.
looking at her.
Margot Robbie plays.
Oh, really?
She plays hockey. I mean, I've never seen video of it. I've never seen her play, but I've read that she plays.
That's
So,
very cool.
maybe she can be your next guest. That would be amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll have to see where my readership or my watchership goes from that.
Yeah. But
But
also, I think it'll give, I think hockey went through a difficult time where it gained this reputation for being brutal, like a brutal sport. And a lot of parents, not only mothers, but a lot of parents didn't want their kids to play because of the brutality of the sport. And so, I think we're still reeling with lower enrollment numbers because of that time. And yes, they've changed a lot of it. They've taken a lot of the fighting out, even though they still argue. Many people argue it's still such a part of the game,
yeah,
in terms of changing momentum and everything else. But so now you can go appreciate the game without the fighting aspect of it. I mean, occasionally there may be a fight, who knows? But I'm willing to bet it's not a part of the women's game like it is the men's game. Like you would never send out somebody to start a fight to change the momentum of a women's game. Like it just doesn't. That's not a strategy that you use in the women's game.
yeah,
So I think in those terms, you're going to be able to get more parents interested in signing their kids up, which is what we need because enrollment, viewership, everything is kind of going down. And again, we need to just grow this game that we love.
yeah. And I love the idea that there are they exist, but they're slowly getting bigger and bigger, and they're coming to the top, which are these organizations that are getting people that not only are afraid of the safety part of it, but also the affordability of it. It's just
Right.
you and I know it's just not an affordable sport,
No.
and so the accessibility of it and is difficult. So
Right.
But once you bring someone to it and you kind of see that little spark in their eye, and they're like, "Oh wow, I got my first goal," or you know, or I just made my first pass, or I was able to skate without falling for a while or something. Those are
Yeah.
like huge things that us as coaches we just love to see. And the thing is, I love to that. I know you're good at it. I'm good at it. I think a lot of coaches in our program are we're so good at making sure that we're telling parents about the wins because
Yeah.
they're important, even if they're minor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because their parents might not know. They might not have the.
Yeah.
They might just be brand new to the sport, just like a fan. So,
Yeah.
well, Alana, this has been really awesome. I think you've given me not only some great perspective on the international game, but also just kind of seeing where women's hockey has come through your life via Minnesota and Sweden and Switzerland and everything else. It's been really great talking with you. Always great talking with you. I not the viewers don't get to see you as often as I do, so um, I'm pretty excited about where this episode's going to go, and thank you for giving us your insights.
Awesome, Steve. Thank you, and good luck on this endeavor of yours. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, no, it's gonna. I'm pretty pumped about it. So um, every episode is going to be something fun.
Awesome. All right. Take care.
Cool, cool. Well, that was a great conversation with Alana. I learned so much about the evolution of women's hockey. I learned so much about um, her experience with it, the fact that there was no women's college hockey except for the Northeast, the fact that not only women's hockey but also her her kind of move where she just kind of got um, wore out from all the rigor of like just constantly trying to win all the time with the U.S. team, and then the being a coach kind of fell on her lap, and she's one of the best I know. She's a great skating instructor, and she really coaches at all aspects of the game, which is really awesome, and she's really lovely to talk to and a really great person to talk to. So definitely, if you'll hear about her again because she's such a good advocate for the sport. Her stats that she found before our conversation um, about viewership and really talking about the growth of the sport and maybe using women's hockey as an aspect of that growth is really awesome. And it was such a great conversation I had with her. I hope you all enjoyed it. We're gonna close out with episode one. We had a band that is close to me. I'm still um, collecting some music so we can make sure every episode maybe got a different aspect or different music. But these guys are killing it. There are just so many good tracks, and it's a good vibe. So I'm gonna bring back Gooseberry for episode 3, and listen, folks. Hopefully, when you see this, you've probably already seen the first game of the season, the preseason, in Australia between the Coyotes and the Kings. So, um, again, hockey's back. Keep your eyes peeled, and we'll see you next episode.